Steve Bowling, Brandon Miracle. We have finished The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. We have previously discussed it with our good friend Daniel Albert, but that's just the early hours. We have gone all the way in. We've reached credits. We've shed a tear or two. We have done everything. Well, not everything. Brandon's done nearly everything, by the way. He has played this game for 130 hours. He's wrapping up the shrines. He's wrapping up the side quests. Personally, I've just done the story, and I'm just dabbling in everything else. But we have played what is possibly one of the greatest games ever made, and we're going to go all the way in. Last time we were teetering around. Spoilers. This time, cut the rope. Cut that damn rope. We're going to talk about all the damn spoilers. Cut that rope right now. But Brandon, seeming as we didn't have you on last time, do you like this game? Do you like it?
No, John, I don't like this game. I love this game! I'm just going to say it right away. This is the best Zelda game ever made, and quite possibly might be one of the best games ever made.
Yeah. And this is one of those rare occasions where there is no sort of doubt about that in my mind. Like, whenever I've played a game that I think may be one of my personal favorites, it takes months to really solidify that. But with Tears of the Kingdom, I've thought that the entire way through. When I wasn't playing this game, I was thinking about this game. It dictated my mind at all times, and when I wrapped credits, I was silent for a moment, just like a moment of just processing everything that happened, and there is no doubt in my mind that this is one of, if not the best game I've ever played in my life.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. Those final moments, which we'll talk about later on, damn.
Yeah,
I was playing it and I was thinking, okay, one of what I think are the most obvious criticisms of Breath of the Wild is that its final moments are a little underwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, once you defeat Calamity Ganon and you get Dark Beast Ganon, it doesn't feel like a proper send-off for a game you spend so much time in. And I was a little fearful that we were going to get a similar send-off for Tears of the Kingdom. Man, was I wrong.
Oh, man.
I was very, very wrong.
One thing this game is really great at, story-wise, is it just makes everything feel important. Like, with Breath of the Wild, the memories were just kind of establishing the relationship Link and Zelda have. There wasn't really any... There were moments of history with the champions, but it was never really heavy. This story, though, it feels like Zelda's on her own journey, and we're kind of experiencing it through those memories. And it feels important. And it both works as a back and forth between the past and present. And I love the way you can experience it, too. Because I know some people who turned the game on, got to Hyrule Field, and just went straight for the story, did all the memories. I personally didn't do that. So the way I did it is I just kind of took things as they came. If I saw something, I'd go and do it, but I never set out an objective to get all the memories. And so I got the Master Sword before finishing the memories, and it didn't click with me, like, the context behind why the Master Sword where it was. And then the payoff of getting the memories and getting all that clicking together was one of my favorite moments of storytelling in a very long time. It just felt so good to justify that whole journey, and that was incredible.
Oh yeah. Should we talk about the Master Sword and what was going on there?
let's talk about the story a little bit. Yeah, so go on. What about the Master Sword?
You and I talked about this after our non-spoiler discussion. I bumped into the Master Sword by mistake.
Yeah.
I had launched myself out of a Skyview tower, and I was just randomly exploring around, and I was like, oh, neat, a dragon. And then I was like, I need scales from these things, probably. So I started going for it. I was just like, I'm going to get whatever this dragon can give me. And I started diving towards it. I was like, I don't recognize this dragon at all. And I was like, there's no lightning or fire or anything around it. I was like, I'm going to get closer than I would otherwise get. And I realized I just saw the Master Sword stuck in the dragon's head. And I was like, no way. It can't be that easy, can it?
And it's a stamina-based one, too.
Yeah,
it doesn't take that many upgrades.
Oh, I felt like such a fool because I had been building up to 13 hearts because I was like, there's no way it won't be hearts again. They show you a heart door right at the beginning. I'm like, they're telling me to upgrade my hearts. So I had 1.8 stamina rings when I got to it. And I was like, I obviously I failed, and I was like, no. And so I immediately ran back to the demon statue in Lookout Landing, and I was like, I'm trading some of these hearts back.
Wait, and you
so that I
found
can
the
go
dragon
get it.
again?
So I just abused fast travel because the dragons don't move when you fast travel. So I fast traveled, traded hearts, fast traveled back to the Skyview Tower, and managed to land on it a second time. And I grabbed it, but just like you, John, I had no clue the context behind why there was a new dragon, and why it, of all things, would be where you find the sword. But it was such a cool moment to just stumble upon it in the world.
So what's cool about the way that you found it is you actually meant to track the dragon around via a quest. So in the Korok Forest, the Deku Tree's like, oh, I've got a really bad tummy. And so you dive into him, and there's depths in him with the hands that become Phantom Ganon.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got to kill those, and for doing that, he rewards you with a little pin on the map that shows you where the dragon's traveling, because he can sense what the Master Sword is. And he's like, oh, it's
really
moving
helpful.
around. Why is it doing that? And so you find it, and it's the dragon. But you just stumbled upon it twice.
Yeah. Yeah. I just happened to find it, and I was so thrilled with how that went. Sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
I was gonna say I had a slightly different experience. I was getting all the memories from the glyphs while going around and getting my towers. At some point, I decided I just want my towers so I can see my map. I already know what the map looks like. This was like maybe 40 or 50 hours into my game. And I get the last glyph, and I see that scene. I don't even remember which one it was. It doesn't really matter. But I see that scene, and then I get the cutscene for the extra glyph. And then that plays out. So I start heading in that direction when I realize that I shoot myself up in the air because I'm just going to glide down from wherever I'm at. The dragon was right underneath me. It just happened to be there. So as I was about to go get the final memory, I said, dragon, and I jumped down on it. And I saw something glowing out of its head, and I was like, I've been seeing that for a while, and I don't know what that is, but now I can go get it. And I landed on its head, and it was the Master Sword, and my mind was blown. By this point, I had seen enough memories that I knew what the dragon was. I had already figured that out. So it didn't entirely surprise me that that's where the Master Sword was. It made sense contextually. So then I grabbed the sword out, went down right underneath where the last memory was, got that, and then got the full context. And it was just explosive how cool that entire thing was.
Yeah. It is one of the best... It's probably the best Master Sword sequence they've ever done. One of the best sequences in a game that I've seen. But we're dabbling around what the dragon is. We don't have to do that. This is a spoiler discussion.
True.
But we probably should approach the story in a more level-headed way rather than just diving straight into what the dragon is. So this is a really bizarre story where it is both a sequel to Breath of the Wild, but it's also going back to the origins of Hyrule with the original king and queen of Hyrule, which I wasn't expecting. But I definitely expected some time travel stuff because we saw Zelda in trailers with no sky behind her. I wasn't expecting it to go this far back though.
I had an interesting conversation with Joe, who you both know. Like the night before Tears of the Kingdom came out, we were talking about the Zonai and stuff like that. And I mentioned that the Zonai, one of the 3 tribes was like the owl people. And I was like, well, Roru's an owl, and there's 7 things. What if there's 7 sages? And I specifically name drop Roru, so color me surprised when I'm watching the opening cutscenes of the game, and Ganondorf mentions Roru by name, and I about lost my mind.
Yeah. It's bonkers.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to see, that name dropped, especially because, and I could be wrong, but I believe the first appearance for Rauru was in Ocarina of Time.
The Sage of Light.
Yeah.
Right?
The Sage of Light. And so, and you can see that Rauru is, even though they never call him out as such, which I found interesting, Rauru is clearly like the Sage of Light within the, time frame of, and I wonder if that's supposed to be, I don't know if they ever call it out, but I don't believe they ever mentioned that is specifically the war from 10,000 years ago. That's depicted in Breath of the Wild.
Right. There's a few things that confuse me about the imprisoning war. There's something of the same name in A Link to the Past, which is a different war. because they just happen to have the same name for some reason. What Brandon and I were actually talking about this a little bit earlier. What confuses me about the continuity of all of this is Ganon as a character. We can argue if there's more than one of him, because Four Swords Adventures technically has a different Ganon. But Ganondorf specifically, there has never been a different Ganondorf. It's always been the same one. And if Ganondorf dies, his followers revive him. It's Ganon being reincarnated doesn't really happen. And so what confuses me about this whole story, is Ganondorf is sealed in Tears of the Kingdom at the beginning of Hyrule. So how the flip is there another Ganondorf between these games? Because this is going back to the start, and he's sealed all this time. However, Ocarina of Time happens before Breath of the Wild, which there are elements of it in there. So how is there another Ganondorf? Where did he come from if he's sealed?
So I think that it's a poorly explained part of the lore insofar as we know that a male is born to the Gerudo, I think every 1,000 years.
I think it's every 100 years even, right?
It seems like every time they're like, let's name this one Ganondorf again. That worked out well last time.
Yeah. But the Gerudo here, like they in Tears of the Kingdom, like the modern day Gerudo, they like, and even the Sage in the flashback, even they're like, oh, we resent Ganondorf now. We're not part of his allegiance. So it'd be weird if they had another Ganondorf and like, yeah, let's follow him again.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, to be fair, the Gerudo of this timeline, let's say, they seem to despise men in general. Like, they are much more negative towards men overall. Like, Link is clearly an exception to them, and they're even surprised. Like when you end up traveling to Gerudo Town, the fact that you're accepted by Riju throws so many of them off. Like they're put off by you, but they begrudgingly accept you.
Not even Urbosa did that, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you say about Gerudo. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brandon.
I had something about Ganondorf. It lost. Go ahead.
Okay. You said about Gerudo Town. We didn't really talk about this in our original discussion because it's a spoiler. Any town's a spoiler. But Gerudo Town was the first one I went to. And it was so cool getting there and just seeing it desolated. Like, I wasn't...
Yes.
We'd seen some towns and trailers like Hatino, and it wasn't that different. But this one, it completely subverted my expectations. And there's those Gibdos everywhere as well. I thought that was so cool. And they implemented the underground segment as in like a hideout for the Gerudos, making it like another town within the town. And I thought that was such a rad reveal. Not every town quite has that kind of drastic change, but all of them have suffered somewhat. And it's great. It's like a great motivator to uplift them all, but it's also just a great way to re-experience them. And like, but both Link's story and Zelda's story, I feel like they're both great. And there's much higher stakes in Link's ones too. In Breath of the Wild, sometimes like there's little quests before the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, and some of them were more high stakes than others. Like in the Gerudo one, you would have the Yiga clan, which was a pretty cool one. But like for the Rito, you would just do like a little archery thing, and that was it. And then you just go to the Divine Beast. Or for the Zora one, you'll just get some shock arrows, and that's it. And then to the Divine Beast. All of these have a much bigger build-up to the temple. And then the temple itself is way bigger than anything Breath of the Wild had. The actual execution of everything was just dialed up to 11 with all of these.
This is actually an area where the game kind of goes back to the Ocarina of Time blueprint a little bit, where the town has been afflicted by Ganondorf in a visible, conceivable way. And then you help the people there with that problem, which then culminates in a temple. And I think it was nice to bring that specific convention of Zelda back, because that was really the only like major part of Breath of the Wild that I felt I missed.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Steve.
Go ahead.
No.
Okay.
You go ahead.
I was gonna say I think that it's really important that they did that because it makes sense contextually within the kind of story of the world, right? Breath of the Wild was very much about a world that had been ravaged, and Ganon was being held back by Zelda. And so she had contained him to this very comparatively narrow space. Whereas in this case, he was allowed to actually kind of just spread his influence over the world. And so you see it in that regard. Like you said, there's very visible, very tangible effects on every major region. And I have to agree with John. Gerudo Town was probably my favorite of the 4 like primary regions that you have to visit, because I think the other ones, like, they didn't seem nearly as damaged. Gerudo Town got the worst of it.
Yeah, like the Rito one had the damaged bridge, which was kind of cool to overcome. I saw some people just like put a bunch of blocks together and made their own bridge. They suggest you do the pinecone trick. I just used the spring or a rocket or something. But otherwise, it was just like, oh, we're a bit hungry here. And that was kind of it.
Yeah.
The Goron one has those sort of mind-controlled, mind-washed Gorons roaming around. But the town itself is kind of the same, though.
It was almost like a allegory for drug addiction.
Yeah.
It kind of was. I do like how not all of them were super serious. Like the one in the Gerudo Town makes sense because Ganondorf probably holds some resentment towards his former followers who have now turned on him. But then with the Gorons are just going through this thing that is arguably very silly, and that just kind of fits their whole nature. They're kind of frumpy and kind of goofy in their own right. So for them to experience something that is kind of silly in the end, it's a nice break in the pace of the rest of the game.
You know what's quite cool as like a comeback to Ocarina's formula is items are kind of contextualized in dungeons again. Because in Ocarina and like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and everything like that, you would like you go to a dungeon, you'd get an item, and then you use that item to navigate the dungeon. And that item is kind of recontextualized via the champions. And it's so cool that they are more than just a post-dungeon reward now. You actually have to use them to solve the puzzles in the dungeon. And especially for the boss fights, you have to use all of them. I thought that was really, really cool. The actual dungeons themselves, they're like a middle ground between Divine Beasts and traditional dungeons.
Yeah.
Like you still have to activate like 5 panels, but they are all visually way more diverse. The puzzles themselves are smarter, and the actual lead up to them kind of gives you that kind of linear feel that both the Divine Beasts kind of lacked, and it just felt like a really good middle ground.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like we haven't touched on it necessarily, but obviously each dungeon gives you, a sage as a partner.
Yeah.
And that sage, like you said, John, kind of helps you out. I initially went towards Hebra because I was hoping that I'd get something akin to Rivali's Gale.
Yeah.
Which obviously is not what happens. You end up getting Tulin, who gives you like a horizontal version of the same thing. But I really loved how each of the sages kind of provided this unique support. And then after you get them, they just kind of fight alongside you.
That's
it's not
so
even
cool.
an item.
Yeah, you've
Like,
got to be careful
Link
with your
ends up-
social clips. You got to turn them off if you're posting something to
Yeah.
Twitter, because you don't want to spoil that stuff.
Yeah, so for those of you that are watching that follow my Twitter, I posted a screenshot of Link riding a bear. And the only reason I ended up riding that bear was because I felt really bad for it, because I had all the sages and they just saw a bear and started attacking
Oh,
it.
no.
They were murdering this poor bear. And so I ran up and jumped on it so they wouldn't kill it for no reason.
I love the more physical aspect of the sages actually being there and doing what they say in Ocarina of Time and literally adding their power to yours. I think that's super cool. I will say their AI isn't the brightest sometimes. Especially,
Sometimes they just stand there, and you're like, please attack them, and they just kind of go like,
my
that's it.
biggest frustration actually comes in the form of using their powers, because like sometimes I need a specific power and the sage I need is actively running away from me.
yeah.
Yes.
It's so frustrating.
Riju all day.
So I went through all of Hyrule Castle not knowing that you could heal your gloom. And so when I was fighting against Ganondorf, I was like, man, if only there's some way to have more than 3 hearts facing this guy. I was going through my inventory and found the sun wheat that you can cook into your meals. Like, oh, I've gone the entire game without doing this. And so when doing that whole minion fight, I remember just like I couldn't get past it. I just kept dying. Like I'll get like 10 minutes into it and just die and die and die again. And then I was like, come on, Sidon, I need your bubble just to protect me for a little bit. But that little Flippo just wouldn't stay still.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting to see that. Like I struggled. Probably the most difficult boss in the game for me was the Queen Gibdo, because Riju would just run away from me while I was trying to activate her power.
Yeah.
And I was like, please stand still. And then when she didn't, the Gibdo would hit her with a tornado and knock her over, thus deactivating it before I could use it. So I was so frustrated with that. I actually learned about the Sundelion cooking thing because my early theory was that the Master Sword was in Kakariko Village in the Ring Ruins. And so I was like, oh, it's going to be there. And so I did all the side quests within the village thinking somebody would give me a tip on how to get into that 5th one where the Master Sword, I presumed, was. Which of course turned out not to be true, but one of the side quests was for someone's grandma who was ill from having touched gloom. And I had to make her rice with a Sundelion to cure her. And I was like, oh, that's what those are for. So yeah, when I went to face Ganon, like you said, getting way ahead of things, I just had every single meal I had was cooked with a Sundelion so that I could just restore a few hearts at a time. Because yeah, we'll get into it more, but when you get to that Ganon fight, unless you know those patterns, he is tough.
He's ruthless. Yeah. But we'll get into that. We can talk about the champions all day long, though, but we're going to get back to the story in just a second. But before we do, Brandon, was there a dungeon highlight? There's technically 5, more so 4 and a bit dungeons in this game. Which one resonated with you the most?
That's a tough one. I have 3 that are kind of contending right now, being the Fire Temple, the Lightning Temple, and the Spirit Temple.
Okay.
The Spirit Temple is a little different than the other ones, though I consider the entirety of that quest to be the Spirit Temple. And I really like that. But if I had to pick one that just made me feel the most Zelda-y, it's tough. I think it might be Fire Temple, but Lightning Temple is right there.
The Spirit Temple's funny, because to me that felt like 4 shrines kind of put together. And then when you get to the end, it's like, Spirit Temple. It's like, whoa, is there a dungeon awaiting me? And it's just a boss fight. But I like that one. What was your favorite of the bunch, Steve?
Man, it's tough for me. I feel like they were very imbalanced in my perspective. I feel like Fire Temple was my least favorite. That one's easy to pinpoint for me. I told you, John, when I was playing it, I was like, I just didn't like it. The design was like trying to figure out like the subway if you've never been to New York. And so I was just lost. And I ended up cheesing the whole thing. Like I used Ascend to just cheat my way through the whole place. And I think you did something similar. I think you mentioned you used like a spring.
Yeah, for a while I was using the minecarts for a bit of it, and then I was looking at the tracks. And I was like, I don't think I want to do this. I just put a spring down and just jumped up to the next level, and that worked.
Yeah. Man, it's a little tough for me. I think Sidon's, the Water Temple, was a bit too easy. I feel like it went a little too simple, and I wasn't a big fan of the boss. I would say probably the Lightning Temple was my favorite for having like the perfect balance, in my opinion, between difficulty and simplicity. Like it was kind of the perfect balance between the two. And to speak to Brandon's point, with all the reflecting light, it felt very much like it would have been at home in Ocarina of Time for me.
Totally. That was my favorite too. I'm not just sure if that's because that was my first one that I did, but I loved the sort of pyramid-y feel to it. Like you're going through a very linear, almost like a maze to begin with, before it opens up into that big kind of more divine-y beast sort of room. But that was my favorite too. I liked all of them though. There wasn't a single one where I was like, oh, I wish this was over. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty good balance, and it's definitely not the best selection of Zelda dungeons ever. But it feels like a much more just middle ground than what Breath of the Wild had. And I think they pulled it off.
The team definitely recognized they had to kind of dial more in that direction again. And I think they did it enough for this game.
Yeah. But
yeah, I really enjoy. Oh,
no, go. I was going to go off a different direction. You go ahead.
I was gonna say earlier we were talking about how the powers for the individual sages factored heavily, and I find it funny that my favorite temple was probably the one where you use the sage's power the least to solve puzzles in the air.
Yeah, it's using the boss fight, but otherwise, yeah, you rarely use that thing in the temple.
Yeah, it was really good though. I want to be clear. I said that I didn't love the Fire Temple. I didn't love it in the context of like comparison to the other temples. I wouldn't say any of them were downright like frustrating the way the water temple was in Ocarina.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And they're all fairly bite-sized too. That none of them took me more than an hour, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
an hour, 2 hours tops is about where you want a Zelda dungeon to land.
Yeah.
And these are all pretty comfortable in that.
Yeah. I still feel like the point, like much like Breath of the Wild, the point of this game isn't really the dungeons. They're more so just to guide you around the world the first time, and then you
Window dressing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's taking you to the key locations, and then it's just up to you to explore. But that being said, they have taken that concept and they have made it much better. And as we're saying,
Yeah. And oh, go ahead.
as we're saying earlier, same with the tiers. Like, it's the same concept, but they just pull it off with a more interesting story. They contextually make it more interesting. Yeah, they've sort of seen what's worked in Breath of the Wild and taken the sort of the lower points and mostly just evolved all of them.
Yeah, the one thing I really like is that they also give you a pretty hefty environmental incentive to complete each of these,
Yeah.
because all of the 4 main locations are borderline uninhabitable when you get there. Whether it's, in Hebra or Rito Village, it's too cold. Like, you have to have the Rito clothes if you haven't completed the dungeon. In Gerudo Town, there's that giant sand shroud that the sand shroud is so thick that I couldn't find my way, and I ended up meeting Riju before I got to Gerudo Town because I got lost. So, they get it to where you don't really want to hang out in these towns unless you've completed the temple.
Absolutely, yeah. We've talked a bit about the story, but not much. So let's dive a bit more into it. We've talked about how it has the past of Hyrule and also working with the present. But let's talk a bit more about Ganondorf. Because Ganondorf has had many good depictions. Wind Waker is probably still... I'd say that's probably still my favorite Ganondorf. However, this one comes ridiculously close. We've never had Ganondorf feel this personable before. Or this intense is maybe the word to use. He's always sort of been this figure clouded in mystery. But this time we really get to see different sides of him, and a more rigorous side as well. But the introduction is kind of evocative of Ocarina, where he's meeting the king. He's even like bowing down the same way, but you can tell right off the bat that this guy means business, and he definitely shows more power than I think any other Ganondorf.
I like that in addition to his strength, you also get a sense of his conniving and cunning.
Yeah.
Like, he recognized when he tried to do the Molduga assault on Hyrule that King Rauru is strong, and this isn't going to work. So he says, I'm going to take a different approach, and creates Puppet Zelda, which almost doesn't work. And then we're met with a very intense scene with Ganondorf and Queen Sonia. He feels like a threat in a way that I haven't felt about him before.
Totally.
Yeah, he feels willing to go a lot further in pursuance of his ambitions, which fits the mold of Ganondorf from every timeline. But I don't think you ever really implicitly see Ganondorf getting his hands dirty in other Zelda games, like killing people.
Yeah.
And certainly, you hear about Ganondorf trying to like overthrow the kingdom, or that he wants to, but you never see him try to do it.
Yeah,
And
never
so
happens.
I've think that was.
I've never thought about that
good
before.
to
You're
see.
right. Like Ganondorf we never actually see him do anything bad, really.
Yeah. Yeah. You see him like ride a horse away and stealing, dropping Ocarina, and, like. But you see him use a very weak spell on a little Link at one point. But
he throws Wind Waker Link into the ocean. Oh no, the bird does that.
Yeah.
He just tilts his head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't do
In
anything.
this game, he straight up kills Queen Sonia.
Yeah.
Like, murders her.
He's the one that does it, which is probably the most interesting thing to me about this Ganondorf. I will say though, I do have a minor gripe in that I wanted more of this Ganondorf in Link's timeline.
You're right. Yeah.
I kind of expected when I got through with the regional phenomena, all 4 of them, and I returned back to Lookout Tower. I was like, I know this isn't time for the final battle, but I expect to see like rehydrated Ganondorf at this point. Like, okay. My thought was, as you gather those memories, you learn that Ganondorf becomes, he's normal. He gets his secret stone that he gets from killing Sonia, and then transforms into the Demon King Ganondorf. And so I thought that the natural progression would be, they spend a lot of time telling us Ganondorf is regaining his power, and it's an interesting parallel to the Master Sword, as we learn. Like, you know, while the Master Sword is being suffused with holy light, Ganondorf is being, you know, restored by the darkness itself. And I kind of expected once we cleared all his minions out, those 4 bosses, that we would then see the revival of, you know, hydrated Ganondorf, and that we would have some type of moment with him. And I was a little surprised we didn't get that.
Yeah, there isn't really much Ganondorf and Link time at all. Like, even right before the final battle, Ganondorf, all he knows about Link is what he's been told from Rauru and Zelda. That there's never that personal connection, which is probably why I liked Wind Waker's Ganondorf so much. Is they take the time just to sort of be in each other's presence a few times. Whereas here, it's only after you do that fight in Hyrule Castle that you get that sort of like projected Ganondorf. And then right at the end, and that's really it.
I do, on the other hand, like the element of Link being this mystifying thing to Ganondorf that he's not quite aware of. Because in the past, Zelda is telling everybody about Link, and nobody's ever met him. So, like, even at the beginning of the game, when you're awoken by King Rauru, he's like, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Yeah. So there's this element of everybody that Zelda has talked to who is anticipating the hero. And I think that's kind of cool.
This Zelda has gone through it too. Like, she has just been holding off Calamity Ganon for 100 years, and now she's been sent back to the past where, like, let's just rip off the band-aid. She's become a dragon for who knows how long.
Yeah.
Who knows how long she's been a dragon
thousands upon thousands of years, it seems.
Yeah. That's...
And, I mean, to the point, it's worth mentioning, too, that they imply that this is very, very far in the past, because Zelda, at the very beginning, mentions, like, she's heard, like, tales of legends of this story. Like, even with access to the royal archives, there was no record of King Rauru in there. And so that is kind of wild that, you know, she kind of thought this was like almost a fairy tale kind of thing.
Yeah. And that scene hits so hard when she becomes the dragon. Like, you know it's happening. It's foreshadowed so much in the cutscenes. But when it actually happens, though, the voice performance, the music, the visuals, it's a perfect blend of everything. And just the eyes opening. And like when I got the Master Sword, it didn't connect to me at all that was Zelda. And then you look at it a bit further, it's like, oh yeah, it's got the same hair, it's the same sort of golden era. Even the eyes are kind of similar. But it all just kind of clicked. And I love how they pulled off the memories this time with the Master Sword. Because previously, it was just telling a story. It was just telling sort of an unrelated story about the past. Whereas this time, everything's merging. The past, the present, and then what leads with the future. It feels just really, really clever. And it feels like this is what they were sort of going for originally with memories, just kind of making the story connect. And that was fantastic. I love too when the dragon first appears, like the tears come out of his eyes, which you figure out are the memories. They're the tear pools that you're collecting. That was great. They recontextualized something that already existed. It was great.
Another cool element with the dragon is when you first step out into the Sky Islands, it's the first thing you see. It's right in front of you, front and center.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, it's out in the distance. You can see it clearly. Like, they wanted you to notice it.
Yeah. Wow.
But to step out,
I failed on that one because I didn't notice it at all.
To step out and then get the mission to find Princess Zelda, to immediately be looking at her and not knowing it, is such a cool thing in hindsight.
Oh, I mean, I will say there's such a beautiful, like, cyclical nature to this whole game. Like, the dragon eating its tail in the logo, I thought represented that we were going to find out that this was the story before Skyward Sword, but really it's like about the story of Tears of the Kingdom. Like, there's so many, like, the cinematography in this game is easily the best Zelda has ever seen.
No doubt.
Because when you look at the game, it mirrors, like, the ending mirrors the beginning perfectly. And so many things, like, you think you're going to travel so far to unravel the mysteries in Hyrule, and you do, but really the greatest mystery of all, it's always right in front of your face the whole time.
Yeah.
And I love that about it. Like, when I discovered that Ganondorf was under the castle where you saw him in the beginning, like, he'd never left. Yeah. He was there still.
And that was never a thought in my mind. When he wasn't in Hyrule Castle, I was like, well, where the hell is he?
Yeah. I got to the point where they're like, okay, Link, you need to explore the depths to find Ganondorf. And I went through the depths for hours, just doing all the side quests, fighting Koga a million times. And then suddenly I was like, where else is there left to go? And of course, you know, if you beat Koga all the times you're supposed to fight him, he eventually just tells you.
Yeah.
And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. It was right under my feet.
That's interesting, because I had always assumed that's where he was. Just because it
Makes sense, doesn't it? But yeah,
Yeah.
it never occurred to me.
It does.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just assumed like the castle flew up into the sky, and I was just like, yeah, Ganondorf just up and left as soon as, you know, he's out there chilling somewhere.
That's a cool point to this game too. Is like it takes a lot of the things you know about Breath of the Wild and literally flips them on its head. Like I guess I don't want to say where it is if you haven't found it. But have you found the Hylian shield?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the fact that it's where the shrine used to be is
Yeah.
really good. Or like with the Master Sword, instead of using hearts, you use stamina. Or you go to Link's house to find out it's Zelda. Like everything's backwards now.
Yeah. Steve said something very quickly that was a great point about how the beginning mirrors the ending. Because, yeah, like you start off, you can't quite catch Zelda, and then she falls into the pit, and then at the end, you finally catch her. That was such a cool callback to the
Oh
start.
my god, I'm getting chills just thinking about it right
Oh,
now.
yeah.
Like the way I love that they made the ending interactive too. Like
Yes.
when you're falling through the sky after that huge set piece of a battle, and the button just says "Dive to Zelda," and I was like, "Let's go,
Yeah.
let's go!" I
With
could. And you have to
magnificent
hold
music.
the button.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yes.
incredible.
I had tears. That it got me.
Those
Like,
were
it
the
felt
tears of the
like she
king's
was
Well,
finally saved.
When Zelda said, like, I'm home, that got me too. Like, there's a
Oh, yeah.
There's also a bunch of moments that made me laugh in like the best way. Like right before you go to the depths of Hyrule Castle, your mission is just destroy Ganondorf, and that just made me burst into laughter. There's a few other moments too, just Ganondorf's introduction, but also in his second phase when his health bar appears, and it just keeps
Yeah.
going. And it's not
So
centered on the
good.
screen either. It's not like it's just like perfect. Just a longer health, but it goes like right to the corner. I just burst down to laughter when that happened.
That extends to
That was
you
good.
as well, because like when he starts damaging you with his malice projectiles, rather than losing health, your hearts disappear. You don't get them
Yeah.
back. I love when games do stuff
Yep.
like that.
And Ganondorf can do those slow motion dodges as well.
Flurry rushes.
Yeah, that
You
was
can
so
flurry
cool.
rush out of yours.
Yeah.
Yep. I with the first time that Ganondorf, like I landed a flurry rush and he flipped out of the way, I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
You cheater.
Yeah. I was saying earlier how I entered that fight not knowing how to restore Gloom. It was on my third attempt at fighting Ganondorf that I got it, and I stocked up on resources. I got a few attack bonus meals as well, and I learned from taking on Phantom Ganon, like getting up in his face is much easier than keeping a distance, because with those hands, when he goes into Phantom Ganon, if you're quite a while away from him, he does that big dive towards you, which is quite hard to avoid. But if you're right in his face and just keep attacking him, he only does that like a spin attack and a few other things, and they're pretty easy to avoid. So I didn't find his first phase that tricky. But then when he becomes Big Demise Red Hair Ganon, then things step up. Then it took a bit, and I was pretty low on resources by the end of that. But what a fight though! What a great battle!
That might be the single best one-on-one sword fight in the series.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I always loved Twilight Princess's final sword battle, but that looks so basic now compared to what they did here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that initially, like when I was fighting through it and I hadn't yet seen the battle through to its conclusion, I was hoping for like a dramatic, like sword in head style moment, which I ended up getting. But I was thinking like, oh man, just why don't we get to kill him right here? I'm grateful for how it played out, but I will say I started to find that some weapons were easier than others with Ganondorf. Like the spear, I could take care of him with his spear all day. That's real easy for me to get around.
Yeah.
I started to grasp the timing for the club, but ironically the sword was the one I had the most difficulty dodging.
I think
Yeah, I ended up adopting your same strategy, John. Like when he would have the sword out, I would just get in his face. I'd I learned to just run up to him and start attacking because it would at minimum force him to do a flurry rush on me. And I'm like, okay, I have to react very quickly, and I could 9 times out of 10, flurry rush his flurry rush.
Yeah.
And that ended up being how I got around his sword most of the time. But the first battle with him was desperate for me. It was like I was down to maybe a quarter of a heart at the end of that, and I was like, oh, he's dead, I think. Which we all know he wasn't.
Yeah.
But
I cannot.
that next phase is killer.
I can't believe it never occurred to me until the moment he ripped it off of his forehead that he would eat the secret stone and become a dragon.
Right. Was never a thought to me either.
Didn't occur to me at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I was a little surprised to see it. I thought it was, even when it happened, I was like, is this gonna fail? Like, what's gonna happen when he eats it? Like, and then what do we do? Because my impression was, I mean, you're down in the depths. Even Zelda as the light dragon is not down there, and the power of the sages can't reach you there, even though they come physically to help you in the battle at one point. So I was like, I don't know if we just have to fight a dragon down in the depths now. Like, this is going to be terrible.
yeah, I was hoping that it would go outside because I had no more gloom restore items. So yeah, I was pretty happy when we finally hit the sunlight. That battle is an amazing spectacle with the dragon. It's not very challenging though. You just can't skydive onto his eyes and hit them, but the pure spectacle of it all though is crazy. Like you're flying on Zelda, the Zelda dragon. You're diving off. You're attacking Ganon. It's a nuts fight. Steve said to Ash at one point, "If you feel like you're prepared for where this game goes, you are not prepared." And this entire climax, I could never have predicted this in my life. It's bonkers. Easily one of my. Well, I think it's easily the best Zelda climax.
Oh, yeah. There's no
Yeah.
contest.
Like Wind
Yeah,
Waker, killing Ganon in Wind Waker is a great moment, but from a pure gameplay and spectacle point of view, this way ahead.
Oh yeah, I was not like I said, I wasn't prepared for this when it happened. I was like, what is going on here? Like and honestly, from a technical perspective, it's bonkers. Like, you're in the skies far above Hyrule, looking down at everything, fighting, Ganondorf or what is it called? The Demon King Draconis or something.
Something like that, yeah.
But and you can literally, like, as part of the battle, each time you destroy one of the eyes on the back of the dragon, he bucks you off, and you have to dive through the air, and Zelda has to swoop in and pick you up and take you back up. And there's no easy gimmies there either. Like, your stamina is not restoring while, if you choose to glide, your stamina is not, there's no updrafts, there's no currents. Like, you have to land on her head and go back. It is just, like you said, John, not challenging in the slightest, but so satisfying.
Yeah.
Like, the payoff is gigantic here.
And I'm glad it
Absolutely.
comes when it does too, because like they give you a fairly challenging fight right beforehand, and basically the reward for beating that is the cinematic spectacle part of the battle, and I think that's the right way to do this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. It's also before this fight too. There's that whole fight with Ganon's minions, and it's so funny how the director of this game, Fujibayashi, is always bringing back his ideas from previous games. Like how the Oracles in Minish Cap had like minecarts and things, which came back for Skyward Sword, and there's a bunch of other examples. But that big battle with all those enemies is so similar to what he did in Skyward Sword on the spiral
Yeah.
down to Girahim.
Yeah.
It's just cool seeing him bring back old ideas and just make them even grander.
What a great moment for Link in Skyward Sword too.
Yeah.
Like, you don't feel any more powerful in that game than you do when you're just tearing through Ganon's entire army on your way to kill him.
Yeah.
Like, which is just such a cool thing.
Yeah.
It-
Fujibayashi deserves so much praise too. Like, it always goes to Eiji Aonuma, who deserves the legacy, sure. But Fujibayashi has redefined Zelda. I wish people spoke more highly of him or knew who he was, because he's such a big deal to the future of Zelda
Yeah.
at this point.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
kind of
he is-
sad. He just
Oh.
sits in the background.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say he is to Zelda what Aonuma was back 20 years ago,
Yeah.
essentially.
Right.
And I feel that, Nintendo has done a great job of cultivating their talent, even if they're not the best at shining a light on them at all times. But they've done a great job of, I mean, if you had asked me 30 years ago, if Zelda would be good outside of Miyamoto's hands. I'd be like, no way,
Yeah.
you know. And then Aonuma came in, and Aonuma has been did a wonderful job with it. And now you have Fujibayashi, who, again, if you asked me 20 years ago if Aonuma should leave the franchise, I'd be like, no way. But you know, I feel like they've really created a strong pipeline of talent to keep this series fresh over decades and decades.
Yeah, totally. But I think that's mostly the gist with the story. We destroyed Ganondorf. He's actually destroyed. He just blows up this giant
In a huge
beam.
explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy is dead.
Yeah.
there's
That
no
was another-
question about it.
That was another point that made me laugh too. Like that huge explosion, and then just the text with a little ding going, "Destroy Ganondorf," and the tick.
Yeah, good.
Good job, Link. You can
Yeah.
scratch that one off in your bomber's journal.
How did you feel
and
about Zelda becoming a human again?
Oh man, it's definitely interesting. I think in the moment, I liked it because I was emotionally invested in Link getting some kind of payoff at that point. Like after adventuring so much and the two of them going through so much, you know, just let them have their moment. But at the same time, and I've said this before, I love a really poignant ending.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been really nice to see Link kind of, okay, I've done it all. I've saved the kingdom twice, you know. Ganon's dead, and I got nothing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna go back to wandering, I guess.
I had
Yeah,
a
it
slight
didn't-
problem with them like continuously reiterating like once if you become a dragon you can never go back, and then just the first opportunity they reverse it, which like I like the happy ending. I like that Zelda came home and they're both happy together, but it felt like maybe another little just small issue with the plot there. Like I would have rather that they maybe did something a bit like for a moment I thought that maybe the Triforce would appear and he would wish for her to become human again, but instead they just kind of magically do it.
The Triforce continues to not play any part in this story at all.
Yeah,
And I find
Zelda
that very
had it
interesting.
when stopping Calamity Ganon in Breath of
Yeah.
the Wild. Yeah, but that was it.
Yeah.
Ganon
That
doesn't
was
even
the
go for the
only-
Triforce in this, does he? That's always his objective, to get the Triforce of power, but not even.
Yeah, no,
brought up.
it seems like this continuity is unaware to a degree of the Triforce.
That's what
like
I
they
think,
they
yeah.
don't really talk about it.
Yeah.
One thing that I found deeply, you know, the thing that bothered me more in the ending though was not Zelda becoming human again, but Link losing the arm and regaining his old arm.
Yeah,
And I was like,
he lost that arm.
you said he almost died and that was gone, and you put it back. You could have done that before.
Yeah.
It seemed to me like they were using the power of recall
Oh,
to
maybe.
So
make her come back
Maybe.
and the arm.
one of the things that really got me though, that was very interesting, was they mentioned that somehow Rauru and I can't remember the queen's name.
Sonya.
Right now.
Sonya.
Sonya, right? Rauru and Sonya used Link as a conduit for their power, implying that he was somehow compatible with the power of the Zonai. And it's the only time they mentioned that at all in the game. And I was like, what does that mean? Is he a descendant of the royal family too? Because
That'd be a bit
that makes
weird.
things complicated.
Yeah.
That makes his relationship with Zelda very weird all of a sudden.
Yeah. I know it sounds like I probably nitpicked at the story a bit. Some parts of it do confuse me, but I think all around, if in just a self-contained bubble, I adored so much of this. I adored the Zonai, I adored Ganondorf, I adored the whole dragon stuff, I adored the ending. I thought it was all great. I've got little problems with it, but it's still... Go ahead.
There are two more pieces of plot.
Hmm.
You both got all your memories, right?
Yes.
So you got the post-credit scene.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
There's one more piece of plot. It's not essential,
Mhm.
but there is somewhat of a lore reward for getting all your shrines. So I'll just say that.
Oh.
I'm so curious.
Get all your shrines,
Man.
please.
Is it still 120 shrines?
It's 152.
Oh, come on.
Is it just clothing again, or...?
Is it an actual like cutscene or something?
It is
That's-
clothing. The lore
Okay.
is the clothing.
Lost the
Oh,
clothing.
oh boy.
I mean...
Man,
you
I
got us
don't
by
want
the
to
hook
Google
here,
it.
Brandon.
I don't want to say anymore. I just want to make sure that people are doing their shrines because this is awesome.
Okay.
Wow,
What-
heavy enough of a spoiler not to be in a spoiler cast.
What
though.
clothing could that possibly be? Huh.
I'll leave you with that
Huh.
nugget.
All right.
All right, I guess I'm going back to shrine hunting tonight.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about before we start to wrap this thing up?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I wanna go around and ask about everyone's favorite side quest because I have one in mind that really stuck with me.
Oh, this is a tough
I'll
one.
give mine last though.
Okay. I'll have a little bit of a think.
There's a lot of good ones this time.
Yeah.
There are,
There
but
are.
I think for me one of them so far stands out.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I guess it's a side quest, right? I love just the chasing the eager in the depths. I thought it felt like part of the story. They kind of lead it that way with they mentioned it really early on about them making like a weapon for Ganondorf, so I kind of treated it as if it were part of the main quest. But it just felt so good and added a really great purpose to the depths. I also liked that they sort of guided you the way to the locations each time with those statues. But they slowly let go of your hand, and at many points you're just navigating the darkness. And sometimes I went so far from those statues because I just wanted to travel as far as I could, so I get like a flying machine and just go into the darkness. And I'd lose sight of the statues for ages, and eventually they'll just pop up again. I'm like, oh, I finally found the route there. And I love too that the whole purpose for why they're down there is because Link knocked him in Breath of the Wild. Which implies
so
the depths has
good.
always been there, which is so good. That's probably my favorite one.
Nice.
That's a good one. I think I'm stuck between two. I'll start with the smaller one.
All right.
Well, I guess it's part of a bigger one. The entire Lucky Clover Gazette
Ooh,
storyline
Yeah.
with Penn, who I love. I love Penn so much. But one of the stops on that quest is the team of researchers who thought Zelda told them they had to work in their underwear. So they're all naked. And then once you clear that whole mess up, there's one guy in there in that stable. If you walk by him, he'll say, I so missed pants.
There's a lot of personality in these quests. Like Breath of the Wild had some good side quests, especially stuff like Tarry Town. But a lot of them were like, I need 50 mushrooms. I need you to get this thing. Where a lot of these, there's still a few like that, but there's so many more that stand out as full-fledged stories. And like sometimes when playing this game, I wasn't quite sure if I was doing a story quest or a side quest, because that's how good it can be sometimes.
Yeah.
They have the new label, Side Adventure, which I
Yeah.
really like.
Yeah. My favorite ended up being back in Terrytown. I went
Yeah,
to
that's a good
Terrytown
one.
pretty quickly on in my game. And when you get there, it's much more of a thriving community. Like Hudson and Ronson have built like a very, it's no longer just sons living there. There's people from all over, and not necessarily related to the side quest, but now you can build a house there, like a modular house, and just add stuff onto it, which I'm very excited to do at some point. I haven't even, I think I bought like the first initial house, which is just 2 rooms. But I'm excited to build that. But when you get there, you discover that Hudson and Ronson have had a daughter, and they are just besides themselves trying to, because apparently in Gerudo culture, when you come to a certain age, they take your kid away and take them back and raise them the rest of the way up to adulthood in Gerudo Town. And holy crap, that hit me in the feels so hard. Just imagining my daughter being picked up by people and just taken away and having to just be okay with it. And there's this, basically long story short, you end up helping their daughter, Madison, find ways to connect with her parents because they just can't snap out of their funk right before she leaves. And at the very end of it, there's this scene of Madison, Rodson, Hudson, and Link on a balloon, and I was getting a little choked up seeing it, but then it was at the very end when they finally take her away, and Hudson just he asks Rodson, he's like, did I do okay? And she's like, you didn't cry. You did good. And I was like, I was losing it. I was just a mess. I was like, I can't imagine my kids.
Yeah, that was a really, really great one. I love just seeing how much Tarrey Town has developed too, because it's the place that you built in Breath of the Wild, or helped build in Breath of the Wild. And it's just great seeing it expand to it's sort of like utopia of Sins.
Yeah, and they've replaced that. They've rebuilt a whole thing with Lurelin now.
Yeah, that was really good too. The whole pirate invasion. Like, they speak about it a bit at the start, but there's people who played Breath of the Wild that never found Lurelin Village because it's not on the critical path. You've got to be exploring to find that place. And it was so cool to just rescue it from pirates. And then the pirates have also gone to Eventide Island, and you find them in a cave behind the island. Like, that whole section was so good.
The pirate thing is probably one of my favorite editions. Well, honestly, the monster base edition thing, like where the monster base has its own life bar. Like it's a boss.
Yeah.
And I just love like going in and causing havoc. And I felt no small measure of pride when I would go to someone and they're like, oh, I was ran out of Lurelin Village. And Link's like, they're dead now. I have slaughtered everyone there. And just the reactions from various people, they're like, you what? Like the one guy was like, you don't look like you could do that. I'm gonna go check.
Another interesting point about Tarrytown is that Madison is one of the only points of reference for how much time has passed. Like,
there's also a lot of the children NPCs from Breath of the Wild have grown as well. Like, if you go around Hatino, every little kid from Breath of the Wild has gone a few inches taller.
But
it's definitely interesting
for Hudson and Ronson to have had a kid who is now as old as she is. So it really puts it in perspective.
Yeah, there was.
Everyone else grows slowly, I guess.
There was a kid NPC in Breath of the Wild that said like only good kids can see the kingdom in the sky, and now they say like, "Yep, told you." It's just so cool that they had that concept all the way back then. And like, there's traces of that in a few places. Like the Zonai ruins weren't really, they were never fulfilled. They were a mystery of Breath of the Wild. Like, it was just this race that's never been spoken of before. It's never really ever explored in that game. And then here, it is now the secret to finding the fifth sage. They take a few areas of Breath of the Wild which were kind of dabbled in, and they fully use them now. Every single space feels used. That's just kind of the game in general. It feels like there's something to do everywhere, and it's important, almost all of it. Like whether it is just finding shrines or Korok seeds, but there's also just that all the side quests feel meaningful. The story feels meaningful. I don't think I've ever played a game this big that continuously feels like it has meaningful content at all times. Like any other open world game has some kind of padding. I never felt that here.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Everywhere I go in the world in Tears of the Kingdom, there's something to do that feels like if you do this, something rewarding is going to happen. Like you never get just like oh hey, you did this for me, I'm gonna check this off your list now. Like you're that much closer to completion. The one thing that I do wonder though, and I was thinking about this because I'm looking at my save file, I'm about 35% complete. My current save file in Breath of the Wild, which is the one I started in 2017, is like 10% complete.
10?
And I'm like, did they just dramatically lower the number of Korok seeds, or what is it that I've got more of in Tears of the Kingdom that I don't have in Breath of the Wild?
Oh.
Or did they stop counting Korok seeds? I haven't even bothered to check.
I think they count everything still. Like
I had read that there were more seeds though.
Yeah.
In this game.
I think one thing that might have sped up progress is I guess you're traveling places faster. So like the percentage counts places you visited. So whenever you go to a new area and it's like, this is Kakariko Village or whatever, that might be it. Maybe you're just activating those zones quicker because you're flying around everywhere.
Maybe, yeah. I will say I filled up my map much faster in this go around just because, like you said, it's so much easier to get around.
And despite like there being 32 more shrines than Breath of the Wild, not counting DLC, I ended up getting them all much faster than I did in Breath of the Wild.
The shrines are much more addicting to go to in this game.
Yeah.
I would even see them in cutscenes and I'd be like, I better mark down where that was. I'm gonna I'm going to go back there and activate that one.
Yeah.
Like, in the moment where you see Zelda become the dragon, there's a shrine right next to her. And I'm like, I need to get that shrine.
Yeah. They're also good, too. Like, Breath of the Wild had good shrines, absolutely. But some of them were just, like, little challenges. Like, they didn't stick with you much. Whereas in this game, they all feel dungeon tier. There's so few that I was like, oh, that was kind of boring. Like, every single one was fantastic.
Even the replacements for the test of powers, the ones where you have to be naked. I forget.
Yeah,
what they call
I love
them.
that they made Eventide Island a genre.
Yeah, they're
That was so
great.
cool. Yeah, man.
Yeah, those are probably my favorite shrines. The ones where you have to just go back to having no gear and figuring it out. I wanted to ask you guys this question since, you know, this is a rare opportunity to talk with two other folks who have completed the game. Did you ever figure out how strong the Master Sword is?
No.
It doesn't tell you, does it?
No,
It sure doesn't.
And
In Breath of the Wild, it's originally 30, right? And then you power it up to 60
Yeah.
with the trial. But here, it just doesn't give you a number. It feels powerful, though.
Yeah.
It feels more powerful than most weapons I had.
yeah, I've been fusing different things to try to figure out how powerful the Master Sword is, to like try to replicate the amount of damage. The strongest thing I think I've made so far without using a special effect is like a sword with a silver bokoblin horn on it for a total of like 88. And the Master Sword's still more powerful than that unfused. And I've fused the Master Sword with all kinds of stuff just to see, that is also an interesting thing in and of itself. Like, it becomes green and temporarily takes on the shape of a fused item and then turns back into the Master Sword if you don't use it.
Yeah.
I wish they'd explain that just a little bit.
That
So I'm
Zonai
like,
tech
what's going
might
on
be
with the sword?
translatable for all we know.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing for me to see that, and I keep wondering if there's like some magical combination between the Master Sword and some material that makes it, you know, an even better version of itself.
There was something I got for a specific side quest that was like, oh, maybe I fused this to my Master Sword. I don't know if either of you have done that quest, but I tried it and
Don't know.
I tried it and nothing happened.
Well, I can't think which quest you mean.
It involves going to the Goddess Springs.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I've got that quest. I haven't done it yet
Yeah, nor have I.
because it asked me to do something. I remember that, and I was like, oh, I'll get to you later. Ganon's waiting.
Yeah, I activated a
Then I
bunch of
forgot.
side quests that I haven't done yet. If I saw someone with a red mark on them, I was like, I'll do you at some point, but go on the list.
If there's any way to power up the Master Sword at this point, I haven't figured it out.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I don't think there is. I'm hopeful we get DLC that,
I was-
you know, similar to the Trial of the Sword.
I was
I
going to
want
say,
that Ganondorf DLC, baby.
DLC is undoubtedly coming. I can't think what it could be at this point though, because they put a lot of Breath of the Wild's DLC in here already as like unlockable things. Like when we were doing our original
appreciated.
discussion, I hadn't been to Hateno yet, and so I was like, oh, they haven't got the heroes, whatever it's called, heroes market,
Heroes Path.
Heroes Path. Yeah, I was like, that's not in this game. Might be DLC. It's like, no, it's in here somewhere. I found it now. But yeah, I can't think what they're gonna do. Because Breath of the Wild gave us another divine BC area and more shrines. I feel like Nintendo stepped up their DLC game a bunch since then, though. Like, almost every DLC now is pretty big. Like Splatoon 3 is getting a pretty big one. Xenoblade 3 got a pretty big one. Even stuff like Bowser's Fury, which isn't really DLC, but it's still huge. I'm expecting something bigger, like much bigger than what Champions Ballad was.
My assumption is that we will get something like the Dragon's Tears quest, but for Ganondorf. Because
That'd be
for as
interesting.
much as we know about all the characters, Ganondorf has a lot of mystery still attached to him. Like we see him
Ooh,
after
see,
he's
I was-
already king.
I was gonna say that I think it would be personally even more interesting to see Raru's story
Oh,
because we
yeah.
know so little of the Zonai themselves. You know, Raru and his sister are the only two that remain. They don't imply that they died either. They imply that they left, like they're from somewhere else. Which could open you up to the whole idea of maybe like the Light Realm or the Sacred Realm from previous games, and maybe they're inhabitants of that.
Yeah.
You know, but they never quite explain what happened to the Zonai that they just kind of all disappeared and left these Sky Islands behind.
I guess the
Yeah.
Sky Islands are the easiest thing to expand to, Because the Sky Islands, it's like Wind Waker almost, where there's like little islands scattered around a much vaster emptiness. And it'd be so easy just to add a new Sky Island or something.
That's true.
And put the DLC there. Because there aren't that many of the scale of the default area. The majority of them are just tiny little islands. So I wonder if maybe they just have like another big one, like the Great Sky Islands.
I wouldn't even mind if there was something that was just separate, like the way Xenoblade's DLCs work.
Sure.
Like something like Future Redeemed, where it is a separate deal that is isolated from the rest of the game, so that it can kind of exist the way that it needs to. And then you could have something like, the Trial of the Sword that's in the actual main part of the game. Because, what I would want from DLC personally is just more story. And if that means containing it, I'm fine with that.
Right. And like from a story perspective, too, they've wrapped things up in a way that Breath of the Wild didn't. They've taken away Link's arm. So it's not like you can continue the story, because the whole game's about having that arm. It's got to be a side thing.
Agreed. But I mean, to be fair, in these games, you never complete the story, right? Like your save is back right before you fought Ganondorf, and he's back. So I could see them doing something similar, where it's like, oh hey, I personally think that the idea of a new Sky Island, like you mentioned, is the likeliest route, because the sky is very sparse, almost surprisingly so.
Yeah.
A lot of those sky towers, when you hit them, you're like, hey, where is the thing I can land on?
Right.
There's
what am I going to?
Areas of the sky too that are very barren. Like above Eldin, there's almost nothing.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, because I think my impression going into the game was that there'd be a lot more up there. And I mean, ultimately, it's really hard to find fault with the game in terms of the amount of content, because there's so much.
Yeah.
Consider
but I
the
think,
depths.
the emphasis placed on it. Yeah, exactly. The depths are terrifyingly huge. So I'm okay with it, but I do think that's, if you get DLC that introduces anything new, it's probably in the sky, and it's probably a brand new structure that's not there today.
Yeah, like the flow of the Sky Islands is basically the interplay between the ground and the sky, right? It's not like another overworld as such. It's more like places you can get to from the ground. I think like when we first saw that tutorial area, people were sort of speculating like this area is huge. The whole game's going to be like this. But I guess the point isn't really to be in the sky at all times, all right? But it's still funny that, like, obviously there will be DLC. It'd be weird if there wasn't. But it's funny that we're kind of speculating about new content with how much content is in this game already. It feels so packed. That even fathoming DLC feels kind of silly, but it's gonna happen.
I don't know. I'm running out, man.
I think you've spent more time on the game than John and I combined at this point.
Yeah, you're nuts. How much did you sleep this last week, Brandon?
I don't want to talk about it.
With Breath of the Wild, I got around 350 hours for that, but that was spread out like 6 years. This game, I'm planning to do kind of the same. I don't know if I'll 100% it the same like I did with Breath of the Wild, but I will chip away at it slowly. I'm gonna do the shrines as soon as I can, but like Koroks and everything, I'll just take my time. I'm just gonna chill and take it as it comes.
Yeah, I'm in a similar
There's
boat.
also... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm committed at this point to finishing at least the side quests, because that's how I did it with Breath of the Wild. I did my shrines and then my side quests, and then anything left in the game after that was, whenever I felt like going back to it.
Yeah.
And there's more of that kind of stuff now, and the game tracks more things. Like, if you go to Lookout Landing, they track every single instance of any boss monster and how many of them you've beaten. So, like, the game is saying, if this is something you want to check mark for, you can have it.
Totally.
Yeah, I was surprised. I tend to, when I need a good fuse item, I'll go back and find a flux construct and kill it. And I thought that I'd never been to the same one twice, but then I went back to one just last night, and I realized he had a little star, and it said, like, defeated. I was like, oh, sorry to do this to you.
This is the kind of game, though, much like Breath of the Wild, where it's not just a fleeting week or a fleeting month that you play it. We're going to be revisiting this game over the next decade, probably, and discovering things over the next decade. Every time you go on Twitter, you're seeing someone post something you never knew was possible. and it's happening all the time. And that happened with Breath of the Wild up until... I mean, people are still finding things in Breath of the Wild, but this just feels like a game that you can't even just speak about in the moment. We're going to have opinions on this game that are going to change and evolve over the years to come, and it's going to be an exciting time. Even when the next Zelda comes, I can't see it undermining this. There's just so much greatness packed in, and even attempting to match it is a high order. And I am not envious of what the development team have to do to one-up this game next time.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because, you guys have been talking about playing this Zelda for the next 6-7 years, and I'm thinking that's assuming that Nintendo's next platform supports this game. Like, who knows what hardware will be on in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's a terrifying thought. I don't want this game to be left behind on an abandoned platform, hopefully. But I struggled to think. I think it's going to be very similar to how we all felt about Breath of the Wild as Tears of the Kingdom approached. Like, I think the big question was, will this supplant or supplement? And I feel like the answer now is firmly that it supplements Breath of the Wild.
Totally.
The experiences are just so very different from each other.
Yeah, the pacing is very different. Like, in Breath of the Wild, you're climbing, you're going everywhere by foot. In Tears of the Kingdom, you're soaring in the sky. Like, it's the same world, but they've recontextualized everything about navigation and how you just move around. It's such a different feel. But also, if you haven't played Breath of the Wild, I feel like you're not that you're getting a lesser experience, but you're missing out on some continuity. Like, every NPC you talk to, or every side quest you do, if you have played the previous game, you're going to have a more meaningful and personal interpretation of that. So yeah, in my view, it doesn't replace Breath of the Wild, but I feel like you still should play both if you can. But either way, they deliver their own accomplishments very well.
Yeah, I mean,
Agreed.
together these games are stronger. It's also very cool that on a singular platform, Nintendo has two very different Zelda experiences that are also so similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't ask for more.
It's like the N64 days if the N64 was popular.
Yeah.
I mean, limiting themselves to the same map just spurred creativity. Like, they had all this time to just focus on the mechanics, and I feel like it's paid off in a way that I don't think is even possible for other games. It's so damn polished. I've never played a game with this scale, with this much to do, that just doesn't break. I've not had a single glitch in this game, other than I guess the item duplication glitch. But like, that's something you have to go out of your way to do. There's not been a single moment where I've like clipped through the ground or I've just hit an invisible wall or something. It just works at all times, which is bonkers for stuff like Ascend. How does that work all the time?
They had 14 months to polish this game after they finished it in March of 22, and that should be a lesson to the games industry at large. Let it cook. Let them cook.
Let them cook.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say. I think the best thing, you guys were talking about the kind of viral nature of Breath of the Wild and how it markets itself. And I think the smartest thing Nintendo did with Tears of the Kingdom was to lower the barrier of entry to being able to make those kind of crazy clips that people see. Like Breath of the Wild, to really do some of the more wild stuff you see in it, you need to have a deep understanding of bullet time and all these other mechanics and the runes and everything. And this one, you just kind of have to have Ultra Hand and a crazy idea.
Yeah.
And I think that is brilliant. Yeah, I mean, we've seen some cool stuff and some objectively horrifying stuff already. But one of my favorites, I saw somebody build a cage, and they favorited this cage. So they put a boss bokoblin in a cage that was full of flame emitters and just burned the guy to death.
That was so good. Yeah.
I was like, could you do that to Ganon? Like, can you just show up to Ganon?
Maybe.
Like, here you go. I have
can you,
the Zonite for it.
Can you do auto build in the Ganon arena? Would that work?
I imagine you can.
I didn't even consider trying.
I want to attack him with like a helicopter now.
Right?
I'm going to try this as soon as we end this call. But yeah, we should probably wrap up because we can talk about this game forever. And I'm sure this won't even be our final discussion. I'm sure we're going to come back at some point in the future. Months, years from now, who knows? But there's going to be so much to say about Tears of the Kingdom. Do you think this will sell more copies than Breath of the Wild? which sold 30 million. So it sold 10 million in 3 days. But we're talking about the pioneer of the Switch, Breath of the Wild, the game that launched it. Can this surpass that?
That's a tough thing. Like my gut instinct says no, but there's more Switches out there than there were when Breath of the Wild came out. So, you're gonna get return buyers from Breath of the Wild, of course, but I have friends personally who didn't play Breath of the Wild who bought Tears of the Kingdom because they have a Switch now. So, that's a factor to take in. If it doesn't exceed it, I think it'll match it.
That's a good question. I think so what was it? It was above a 1-to-1 attach rate for Breath of the Wild for a little bit.
It was, yeah.
Like people who didn't own a Switch were buying Breath of the Wild for Switch. So you basically have to achieve, based on the current numbers, there's like 100 million plus Switch, 120 plus million Switches out there. So you need roughly a 25% attach rate. So 1 in 4 owners. I'm optimistic. I'm going to say that by the end of the Switch's life, which we might be a year away from that, but I'm going to say that it'll surpass Breath of the Wild. I think because, like I said, it's easier word of mouth advertisement at this point. It is clearly like the most hyped game of the year. And it's not even close, really. Like, you look at sites, I mentioned this in our discussion with Daniel, but you look at sites that traditionally don't talk about Zelda, and everyone's found a way to work Zelda into something. Like, even non-gaming sites are finding ways to talk about Zelda to get them to click on whatever their beat is. So, I think that there's definitely a strong chance for it to cross that 30 million threshold.
Yeah.
That sustained momentum is going to be huge. So I feel that we're likely going to see it surpass those numbers.
10 million in 3 days is the same as the best performing Pokemon game, which was Scarlet and Violet. When that came out, that's the fastest selling Pokemon. And it's crazy to think, like, Zelda has always been popular, but it's never been Pokemon popular. Nowhere close to that level. Like, before Breath of the Wild, Zelda games would perform like around 5 million. That was kind of what they would generally do. A few went above that, not many though. Some below that. Like Skyward Sword was like 3 million. But now it is easily one of their biggest brands out there, and it's great to see. I know some people miss the more traditional Zelda, and I miss them too. I hope that we get them in the future. But this is clearly something special, and it's so cool that not only is this one of the best games of all time, but it's getting the attention it deserves. And what more could you ask for? But we should say our farewells now. So thank you for joining us, viewers. We appreciate you. You're like our 4th member of the panel, each and every one of you. So thank you for joining us. If you want more from us, you can support us on patreon.com/GVGaming. We have lots of bonus goodies. You can submit questions to our GVG cast. You can watch many discussions live. You can also get early access to content that we make, and loads more. So thank you once again, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.